Hello everyone, and welcome back to Fun with Flags in History. I'm your host Frank, and today we are going to talk about one of the most crucial, but not as talked about, moments in modern history. The creation of the Soviet Union, the socialist state that rocked a majority of the 20th century and paved the way for foreign relations that exist between the United States and the modern successor to the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the Russian Federation, and its successor states including Ukraine, Belarus, Latvia, and so on. But before we do, if you're new to the channel and enjoy content pertaining to obscure historical topics and the occasional reference to vexillology, be sure to smash that like button and click the notification bell to be the first to see what's coming up on Fun with Flags in History. And if you still use Facebook, I'm on there too, where I share interesting pieces of history and vexillology. So go check it out after the video. Now, let's not waste any more time and hop right into this, shall we?
Let's do it!
It's 6:15 p.m. in Petrograd. A final assault against the Winter Palace, against 3,000 cadets, officers, Cossacks, and female soldiers, was not vigorously resisted. The Bolsheviks delayed the assault because they could not find functioning artillery. A large group of artillery cadets abandoned the palace, taking their artillery with them. At 8 p.m., 200 Cossacks left the palace and returned to their barracks. With the cabinet of the provisional government within the palace debated what action to take, the Bolsheviks issued an ultimatum to surrender. Workers and soldiers occupied the last of the telegraph stations, cutting off the cabinet's communications with the loyal military forces outside the city. As the night progressed, crowds of insurgents surrounded the palace and many infiltrated it. At 9:45 p.m., the cruiser Aurora fired a blank shot from the harbor. Some of the revolutionaries entered the palace at 10:25 p.m. and there was a mass entry 3 hours later. By 2:10 a.m. on October 26th, Bolshevik forces had gained control. The cadets and the 140 of the Women's Battalion, volunteers mainly, surrendered rather than resisted the 40,000 strong attacking force. After sporadic gunfire throughout the building, the cabinet of the provisional government surrendered and were imprisoned in Peter and Paul Fortress. The only member who was not arrested was Kerensky himself, who had already left the palace. With the Petrograd Soviet now in control of the government, garrison, and proletariat, the Second All-Russian Congress of Soviets held its opening session on the day, while Trotsky dismissed the opposing Mensheviks and socialist revolutionaries from Congress. The first attempt to regain power from the Bolsheviks was made by the Kerensky-Krasnov uprising in October of 1917. It was supported by the Junker Mutiny in Petrograd, but was quickly put down by the Red Guard, notably including the Latvian Rifle Division. The initial groups that fought against the communists were local Cossack armies that had declared their loyalty to the provisional government. Kaledin of the Don Cossacks and General Grigory Semenov of the Siberian Cossacks were prominent among them. The leading Tsarist officers of the Imperial Russian Army also started to resist. In November, General Mikhail Alexeyev, the Tsar's chief of staff during the First World War, began to organize the volunteer army in Novocherkassk. Volunteers of the small army were mostly officers of the old Russian army, military cadets, and students. In December 1917, Alexeyev was joined by General Levir Kornilov, Denikin, and other Tsarist officers who had escaped from jail, where they had been imprisoned following the abortive Kornilov affair just before the revolution. On December 9th, the Military Revolutionary Committee in Rostov rebelled, with the Bolsheviks controlling the city for 5 days until the Alexeyev organization supported Kaledin in recapturing the city. According to Peter Knez, the operation begun on December 9th can be regarded as the beginning of the Russian Civil War. Having stated in the November 1917 Declaration of Rights of Nations of Russia that any nation under Imperial Russian rule should be immediately given the power of self-determination, the Bolsheviks had begun to usurp the power of the provisional government in the territories of Central Asia soon after the establishment of the Turkestan Committee in Tashkent. In April 1917, the provisional government set up the committee, which were mostly made up of former Tsarist officers. The Bolsheviks attempted to take control of the committee in Tashkent on September 12, 1917, but it was unsuccessful, and many leaders were arrested. However, because the committee lacked representation of the native population and poor Russian settlers, they had to release the Bolshevik prisoners almost immediately because of a public outcry, and a successful takeover of that government body took place 2 months later in November. The Leagues of the Mohammedan Working People, which Russian settlers and natives who had been sent to work behind the lines for the Tsarist government in 1916, formed in March of 1917, had led numerous strikes in the industrial center throughout September 1917. However, after the Bolshevik destruction of the provisional government in Tashkent, Muslim elites formed an autonomous government in Turkestan, commonly called the Kokand Autonomy, or simply Kokand. The White Russians supported that government body, which lasted several months because of Bolshevik troop isolation from Moscow. In January of 1918, the Soviet forces under Lieutenant Colonel Muravyov invaded Ukraine and invested Kiev, where the Central Council of the Ukrainian People's Republic held power. With the help of the Kiev Arsenal Uprising, the Bolsheviks captured the city on January 26th. With the Soviet government's enemies such as the deposed Tsar and his family, as well as Alexander Kerensky either dead or exiled, and the Russian Civil War beginning to draw to a close, the respective heads of the Soviet Federative Socialist Republic met in Moscow to discuss the formation of a union between their socialist republics. The treaty's text was prepared by a commission of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, at that time being called the Russian Communist Party Bolsheviks. The treaty was a result of many internal political conflicts between the Bolshevik Party and the government inside the Union. Initially, Vladimir Lenin did not see that Russia's October Revolution would end all foreign borders as such. That view was supported by Leon Trotsky and his followers, who believed that Russia was only a first step in a future world revolution. However, as the Red Army approached the edges of the former Russian Empire and its borders, including the newly created borders of areas that had declared independence after the October Revolution, it needed an excuse to cross them. One such method was a creation of an alternative government, a Soviet republic, which would then take over authority as the Red Army ousted the existing government. That was the case with Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, and failed campaigns such as in the Baltic states and Poland. Alternatively, it would use the presence of a minority to undermine the standing army, such as the establishment of the Tatar and Bashkir autonomies, and where no national minority, a government based on geographical locale, such as the Far Eastern Republic and Turkestan. However, the Red Army's ultimate failure in the Polish-Soviet War placed the Bolshevik World Revolution plans on hold. Simultaneously, the growing figure of Joseph Stalin pursued a different agenda. Lenin himself saw the creation of national republics as a permanent feature in line with his Korenizatsiya policies. In spring of 1922, Lenin suffered his first stroke, and Stalin, being a People's Commissar for Nationalities, gained a new official chair as the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Stalin argued that because of the Russian Civil War had now concluded and war communism had been replaced by the new economic policy, it was necessary to reorganize the Bolshevik state into a single sovereign entity so that its legal de jure framework would match its de facto condition. That process would require the liquidation of many splinter Soviet governments and the restoration of the supreme rule to Moscow. In January of 1922, Georgy Chicherin, the then People's Commissar for Foreign Affairs, sent an official inquiry to the authorities of the Russian SFSR about the possibility of representing the legal interests of other republics. Stalin took the position that the Russian SFSR should represent the other republics in the field of foreign policy, including at the Genoa Conference in 1922. Although there was no legal act that would grant it such powers, the first talks between the authorities of individual republics on the drafting of the treaty began in 1922. The line went directly in conflict with both proponents of Korenitsatsia and some of the local governments, most notably in Ukraine, where it was opposed by Christian Rakovsky, and Georgia, where the dispute gave rise to the Georgian affair. Thus, the treaty can be viewed as a compromise between the different groups within the Bolshevik camp to satisfy the aspirations of large minorities, the named examples of Georgia and Ukraine, and also allow for potential expansion as well. Byelorusia, or Belarus, was the smallest republic, but its official languages included Polish and Yiddish in addition to Russian and Belarusian to undermine the authority of the neighboring Second Polish Republic, and to use its sizable Jewish minority, as well as the Belarusians and Ukrainians in Poland, as a future fifth column. At the same time, it created a new centralized federal government in which key functions would clearly be in the hands of Moscow. The original document included a cover sheet, the declaration, the treaty, containing the preface and 26 articles, and the signatures of the delegations that signed it. In the cover sheet, the title, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, was typed in Russian, French, English, and German, as well as the actual words, Treaty on the Formation of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, also in those four languages. It contained the original state emblem of the Soviet Union. The declaration was written as a reflection on the contemporary international relations and why the treaty was necessary. According to the narrative, there were now two distinct camps: an exploiting capitalist camp with colonialism, chauvinism, and social and ethnic inequalities, and a free,
it's free real estate,
socialist one with mutual trust, peace, and international cooperation and solidarity. The former sought to destroy the latter, but because of the common good that the latter is based on, the former has failed. The declaration goes on and lists three factors as to why this union is a necessary step. First of all, the aftermath of the Civil War left many of the Republic's economies destroyed, and the rebuilding in the new socialist fashion is proving difficult without closer economic cooperation. Secondly, foreign threats continue to loom over the socialist camp, and its sovereignty requires an alliance for defense. Finally, the ideological factor that the Soviet rule is internationalist in nature and pushes the working masses to unite in a single socialist family. These three factors justify uniting in a single state that would guarantee prosperity, security, and development. Finally, pertaining to this document, the declaration then specifies that the resultant Union of Soviet Socialist Republics is one that is created on free will of the peoples, that its purpose follows the ideals of the October Revolution, that each and every socialist republic has the right to join and leave the Union at its own will, results may vary,
so that was a fucking lie,
and hinting at the Soviet foreign policy of socialist irredentism, finishing the statement that the treaty, quote, will serve a decisive step on the path of unification of all workers into a world socialist Soviet republic. In the years following the formation of the USSR, many events transpired, such as the death of the leader of the Bolshevik Party, Vladimir Lenin, the rise of tyrant Joseph Stalin, as well as later events such as the coup that took out Georgy Malenkov by Nikita Khrushchev and Nikita Khrushchev's eventual coup by Leonid Brezhnev, ironic, I know, and the eventual perestroika and glasnost policies that was led by future General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev that would later dismantle and dissolve the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics.
Sometimes nothing brings people together like a nice hot pizza from Pizza Hut.
The creation of the USSR led to many real-world consequences, including the deaths of millions of Ukrainians through the Holodomor, which Ukraine recognizes as a genocide, as well as the deaths of thousands through Stalin's Great Purges, executing even his own chief of secret police, Nikolai Yezhov. However, such consequences also gave rise to the Soviet nostalgia that is present both in the ideologies of leaders like Russian President Vladimir Putin and Belarusian President, or disputed Belarusian President, Alexander Lukashenko.
As for that one, whoever he is, pink or blue, who was shouting about dictatorship, when I heard it, I thought, it's better to be a dictator than gay, but God will judge him.
As well as the rise in support for the preservation of the past in these post-Soviet states such as in Belarus, Russia, and Transnistria. Such consequences have also led finally to the invasion of Ukraine and the Russo-Ukrainian War, which has still been going on since, as well as past conflicts such as the Russo-Georgian War that took place approximately 15 to 20 years ago. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to give it a like. And if you'd like to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell, as not only does that support me and the algorithm, but also it lets you, the viewer, know when I will be releasing my next video. Anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. This is of course Frank with Fun with Flags in History, wishing you of course a happy holidays, happy new year, and of course, I hope to see you guys in the new year as I make new content for this channel, and let's see where this takes us. Alright? So, this is of course Frank with Fun with Flags in History, signing off, and have a good one.